Hello, welcome back to the NOTCAST. It's Thursday? Thursday. Never could get the hang of Thursdays. So it's Thursday, 26th of October, 2023. Yeah, Thursday, 26th of October, 2023, NOTCAST 328. And today I'm going to be talking about Pink Floyd's 1972 studio record, Obscured by Clouds, that I rate very, very, very highly indeed. Although, perhaps for those of you who are new to the channel, you think all I ever do is talk about Pink Floyd. Not really true. I try to do a band, or each band, about once a month, and obviously go through several bands at any one given point in time. If you've got a band that you or an act that you think you'd be interested in hearing me talk about, firstly, it's lovely that you'd be interested. Secondly, do put it in the comments. I am racking up some ideas around what to talk about in the future. Since today I'm talking about Pink Floyd's 1972 album, Obscured by Clouds, this means that's also the last appearance we're going to get for the Pink Floyd Early Years box set, which is quite a beastie indeed. In fact, this is just the lid, because I actually probably need to take spinach like Popeye if I'm going to lift the whole thing up, because it's a 27 disc set. So let's move the box over there. So start off 1972, which I think is we're now just after the cusp of the copyright extension periods, which means that undoubtedly at some point on the 31st of December this year, we're going to get lots and lots of unofficial streaming releases from 1973, or unofficially recorded streaming releases, thanks to the European Union's copyright laws, which are 50 years after the date of recording. You either use it or lose it. So they're going to put loads and loads of shows from 1973 on streaming platforms towards the end of the year in a couple of months' time, so that they can still claim, we've published them, and they're obviously crappy audience recordings that we already will know and love. And 1972, because that's now over 50 years ago, has seen a proliferation of unofficial releases that exploit the copyright gap, which I will be addressing at least five of them actually, in the coming few minutes. So start off 1972, which you might think, Obscured by Clouds. That was the only thing that happened that year for the band, that and playing live. Au contraire, mon frère, 1972 was the year that saw the debut, the first live performances of an upcoming piece by the Pink Floyds called Eclipse, a piece for assorted lunatics. There was a meeting in Nick Mason's kitchen in late 1971, just after the release of the Medal album. And the idea was to put something new together for the 1972 tour. In those days, bands wrote and recorded new material very frequently, whereas now obviously we are now I think we're 6 years actually away from any studio recording of completely new material by any member of Pink Floyd. In fact, although it's been fairly prolific in the past few years, Pink Floyd has become a legacy act, undoubtedly. And legacy act is code. It means you're old and you've made a lot of records in the past. But for previous releases, for example, today saw the announcement of the release of a CD and Blu-ray version of Atom Heart Mother, which 52nd anniversary, I guess, maybe. Also this year, we've seen the remixes of David Gilmour and the Orb's Metallic Spears album, Roger Waters' Lockdown Sessions, and the Dark Side of the Moon Redux release, which I am well known to be not a fan of, and also the Stephen Wilson remix of Rick Wright's 1978 solo album Wet Dream. So effectively 5 new releases plus the multiple repackages of Dark Side of the Moon for its 50th birthday, including a woefully exhaustive box set that at the same point is massively incomplete. Obscured by Clouds has no such distinction. Pink Floyd soundtrack albums are thought of as lesser pieces in the band's body of work. I don't agree with that assessment. I think the Pink Floyd soundtrack albums are very good, and in fact very reminiscent of Mogwai soundtrack albums. They're albums that exist for a purpose, to soundtrack a film or a TV show, but at the same point they're constructed in such a way that they are effectively new studio records written and recorded quickly and without necessarily being overthought too much. So for example, the January 1972 tour that saw the debut of the piece Eclipsed, saw the band writing a new song cycle. Now, song cycles, they're very prog rock. As you probably worked out, despite what Pink Floyd want to think of themselves, Pink Floyd, like The Cure and the Sisters of Mercy, both of whom issue the tag goth, Pink Floyd are prog. They are. There's no two ways about it. They've just become incredibly popular at the same point. And when a band becomes incredibly popular, sometimes they eclipse, no pun intended, the original parameters by which they have previously been defined. Oasis were Britpop at one point and then suddenly became something far, far bigger than that. Same with Blur, although Pulp and the Suedes never quite gravitated beyond that in terms of people thinking about them as Britpop. Pink Floyd were prog, but at the same point, they're just huge, and therefore, because they play in stadiums, they're automatically stadium rock, whether they like it or not. So the January 1972 tour, which premiered in Brighton and has been released on a number of unofficial CDs, including this 1991 release, Pink Floyd The Dark Side Rehearsals, live in Brighton. This is the very first time that most of Dark Side of the Moon was played live. It comes in a Fat Boy jewel box, 2 CDs, undoubtedly staggeringly expensive upon release. I bought this in about 2004 from a Pink Floyd fan that was ditching his CD collection. I paid about £150 and I got all of his bootlegs, and that is quite a lot of them, at least one for each album and often 2 or 3 or 4 or more. So I got something like 20 CDs plus a ridiculous Pink Floyd flag for £150 posted to me. I was quite pleased when it came in the post, actually. I was like, oh, great, new rare Pink Floyd, because that was in the days before YouTube streaming. These days you can put any show into YouTube and listen to it and watch it. Those days you couldn't do it. You either had to find a torrent or you had to find one of the bootleg sites that were blogs on Blogspot, where you could download it from Mediafire or something before it disappeared forever. And that was only 2 years after the invention of broadband, so most people were still used to, well, you download an MP3 and it'll take about 2 hours to download 3 minutes of music, and eventually you'll be able to have a full live show. Pink Floyd Dark Side Rehearsals then, one of the OG Pink Floyd bootlegs. This one, again, as I said before, recorded at the Brighton Centre on the 20th of January 1972, and because of a failure of the tape machine to keep up with the track Money, the band play all of side 1 plus 2.5 minutes of Money before they then move into Atom Heart Mother, Careful with That Axe Eugene, One of These Days, Echoes, and A Saucer Full of Secrets. Echoes being 26 minutes long, A Saucer Full of Secrets being 17 minutes long. So live and on stage, Pink Floyd were still improvising their way through the songs, seeing them as basic core templates around which they could play around. Roger Waters' shows are now very, very precise, and they're timed down to the millisecond, and there's no room or scope for improvisation unless it's Roger talking in between the songs with whatever it is that's on his mind at that particular moment, inevitably something to do with politics. Dark Side Rehearsals, it's fascinating to hear the first public performance of most of Dark Side of the Moon. So you've got Speak to Me, Breathe, On the Run, which was then called the Travel Sequence, which is a kind of like an instrumental jam, Time, a reprise of Breathe, The Great Gig in the Sky, before the female vocals were added, which therefore had segments from, I think, readings from the Bible or the book of, and I've never pronounced this, the Book of Ephesians, or Ephesians maybe? I don't know, I'm sure one of you will know. In a foreign language that kind of play underneath the track whilst Rick Wright plays the leading piano melody, and we get absolutely none of Claire Torres speechifying over the track. Although it was called the Mortality Sequence at the time. And Dark Side of the Moon was called Eclipse, as I mentioned before. It was designed to be played live on the 1972 tour, and so the band members could then play it live as a new piece because they started premiering new pieces, and then also kind of form it live on stage into the final and finished version. Some of it was written at Decca Studios, some of it was written at a place called Broadhurst Gardens in Hampstead, which I think might have been Roger Waters' home studio, and address the themes of what drives people mad using unused existing pieces from the band's body of work. So Us and Them, for example, which wasn't performed on the first show, because they went into and played Atom Heart Mother instead, is based upon an instrumental piece that was known as the Violence Sequence, which I think was from Zabriskie Point. And I think David Gilmour and Roger Waters kind of described this as, David said that Roger Waters wanted this, The Dark Side of the Moon, to be straight, clear and direct, with nothing hidden in the mysteries, getting away from the psychedelic warblings to something that was more obvious and resonated with people. And of course that worked, because the Dark Side of the Moon album, which is the next Pink Floyd episode I'm going to talk about, is one of the biggest selling albums of all time. So Dark Side of the Moon was premiered live throughout all of 1972. It was built and constructed during live performance, adapted and evolved over time. And in the middle of that, in I think between February and March, they did some recording for what became their next project. And their next project, and this is the album, of course, that the title is about, is the soundtrack album Obscured by Clouds. Now, Obscured by Clouds is the soundtrack to a film called Vallee, and there is a contractual reason, not particularly exciting, as to why Obscured by Clouds is not called music from the film Vallee, because I think there was something around a dispute with the film company and copyright at the relevant point in time. It was recorded in 2 weeks, both before and after the Japanese tour, at a place called Strawberry Studios, which was near Paris. It was the last combined effort by the band before Dark Side of the Moon and the rise of the ego and the rise of people claiming individual parts of it, saying, I am the creative genius of Pink Floyd, and the rest of you are mere nincompoops called the muffins that wouldn't have an idea in your heads unless it ran you over with a blaring siren. The perception is Pink Floyd soundtracks aren't very good, and that they aren't to be taken as seriously as their proper studio records. Well, that's bullshit. As far as I'm concerned, Obscured by Clouds is better than a lot of Pink Floyd's standard non-soundtrack studio albums. It's a very cohesive piece of work. It benefits from not having that degree of being massively overthought and massively navel-gazed. It just kind of exists, and it was a spontaneous creation. And sometimes when you put a band in the studio that are used to tinkering, you go, you've got 2 weeks to an album, sometimes because there isn't any thought that's getting in between the brain and the hands and the instruments. It becomes something that feels more sincere and quicker and more spontaneous. And you listen to, or I listen to, Vallee or Obscured by Clouds, and I don't see any qualitative difference, anything that makes it any lesser than the preceding record, Medal, or the subsequent record, Dark Side of the Moon. I am a huge fan of Obscured by Clouds for loads and loads of reasons. But the main one is that this album flows. It flows absolutely perfectly. And it takes the approach that they had, which is that, okay, so you've only got two weeks to make a record, but that doesn't mean you have to make a bad record. And although the cover is in itself, you look at it and kind of go, well, what is that? What does that signify? By the way, it's a picture of a man climbing a tree. It's a still from the film that was then placed onto a piece of card or onto a table and then photographed. But the photograph came out of focus, and they chose that as the cover. It's a deleted scene. It's not in the actual film of Vallee, but it's good enough, and it kind of represents the perhaps it doesn't have the iconography of Atom Heart Mother or Dark Side of the Moon or Wish You Were Here or Animals or anything like that. But what it does do is it kind of captures that fleeting sense of existing in the moment, living in that exact time and not overthinking or overlooking or looking over your shoulder at what's coming next. It's a brilliant little record. I'll say little, it's not, but I absolutely love it. Now, the original 1972 release, this is, and let me just quickly check, yep, File Under Popular Pop Groups. This is a 1972 edition of the record. And to stand out from other records on the shelves, it had rounded edges here, 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 and here. And that made it perhaps a little bit different. And although if it ever had an inner sleeve, my copy doesn't. This is definitely not an original inner sleeve, because original inner sleeves would be yellow and faded and crinkly, because these were mass-produced works of art. These weren't designed to sit on people's shelves half a century from the date of release and then to be regarded as, classics. It was like, well, if we sell that, then maybe next week somebody will buy something else with their pocket money or their pay packet. They weren't thinking about what state this was going to be in 50 years' time. And it feels like it's a really solid record. Now, there's two types of soundtracks. Pink Floyd's soundtrack work always falls into my preferred model for soundtrack. So there's two types. The one which I don't like so much is what John Carpenter calls Mickey Mousing. And Mickey Mousing is the type of soundtracks that we have from artists and scorers like Hans Zimmer, James Horner, Jerry Goldsmith, John Williams. Great scores, but they are scores that telegraph to you right down to the frame exactly how you need to feel at any given fraction of a second. And the cues are not designed for listening at home. They're designed really to evoke emotions in you in the cinema. And so, for example, Raiders of the Lost Ark, there's going to be an action scene, very probably involving a truck or a car or a horse and a whip and some punching and maybe some Nazis, where the music was designed to very much, as Indy's hand connects with the chin of the Gruppenführer and knocks him off the tank, he goes, "Ba-doomph," and you kind of go, right, you're meant to feel, ecstatic now. Oh, Indy's fallen over. There's a sergeant that's going to push him under the wheels. You need to feel tense for this exact 8 seconds. Then, oh, he's got hold of his belt and he's dragged it into a wheel and it's going to crush him slowly. And then you've got another 3 seconds where you need to feel, oh, is this going to work? Is this not going to work? And then, like, as you realise, the guy's going to be crushed to death in front of you, but Steven Spielberg is going to just kind of like, pan away. That's where it needs to stop for 8 seconds. And then you need to cut to the section where he's going to lock eyes with the love interest, and then you get the love interest that's in there. And what that does is that removes the sense of home listening and independence around the music. It makes the music very, very predictable. And so therefore there are experiments that people have done where they've rescored movies. Steven Soderbergh, for example, did a silent version of Raiders of the Lost Ark where he set it in black and white and set it to Trent Reznor's score to say, well, how's this film going to work if you take all the sound effects out, all the colour and all of the John Williams score, and you just have somebody else's sound effects? Or, for example, especially on Blu-rays and DVDs, not so much these days because physical media is now a niche market, where they have just the soundtrack score. You can listen to the isolated score to films like, for example, Tom Cruise's 1985 unicorn epic Legend, which I've been talking about today with my brother. I know he's going to be watching this, so hi Graham, hope you're having a lovely time doing the washing up. And then the other films where it is Mickey Mousing and telling you exactly what to feel at exactly every moment where you've got. Whereas the soundtrack to Obscured by Clouds follows the same approach that Pink Floyd took for More, which was that they watched the films. And they sat down with notebooks and stopwatches, and they timed at what point in the film the scene would start and finish, and then they worked out, right, and then they wrote down some impressionistic ideas of what the rushes or what the finished cut of the movie was going to do. This is the same approach, by the way, that Tangerine Dream took. So, for example, when Tangerine Dream were recording the soundtrack to the incredible William Friedkin movie, Sorcerer, also known as Wages of Fear, which, by the way, I'm a huge fan of William Friedkin's work, they were sent photographs of scenes from the film, and then descriptions of what those scenes were in the film and ideas of the rough approximate length of what they were going to be. And this was happening whilst the film was being shot in South America. So they FedExed over a tape to the director, 90 minutes of impressionistic noodlings, rough versions of those tracks. And whilst he was filming in South America, they were actually playing back rough drafts and rough mixes of the soundtrack on the set of Sorcerer in South America before the film had finished being shot, which is wonderful and quick. Obscured by Clouds, more Mogwai soundtrack work, by the way, which is absolutely phenomenal. The Mogwai soundtrack to the film Atomic is one of my very favourite albums of all time. Follows a very similar approach, which is that they watch the film, they watch the rushes, they put together themes and ideas, and then they go, roughly it's going to sit here in the film and it's going to be roughly this long, and then they write a song that they work with that, and then the finished track doesn't need to change on dependence with the final edit of the film. The final edit of the film can move bits around, 30 seconds here, 30 seconds there. And what it does is it captures the theme of the film, and that is what Obscured by Clouds does. Is that it obviously recorded it in two main chunks. The first one, 23rd to the 29th of February 1972. The second part from the 23rd to the 27th of March 1972. And the 23rd to the 27th of March was effectively the final touches to it. So the vast majority of the recording had been done in a week and a half. And then the second part was remixes, finalization, and final edits of it. So it's kind of like when you know what it's going to look like and you're just shaping it so that it's absolutely right. And that was Obscured by Clouds. And at the same point, the band then went back on to tour. They played America in May, which was the second of the bootleg CDs. I'm going to be showing you the unofficial CDs. This is called Pink Floyd on the Run Live in Boston 1972. This is a 2 CD set in a trifold sleeve. It's a remastered audience recording of the band performing at the Boston Music Hall in Massachusetts, a place I undoubtedly will never get to go to, Massachusetts, on May the 4th, 1972. Side 1, or disc 1, is then performing that version of Dark Side of the Moon as it started to form itself. Then disc 2 is their standard kind of encore set of One of These Days, Careful with That Axe Eugene, Echoes, and on some nights they played a blues jam, which is included on here as well. So this, alongside a couple of the other releases I'm going to show you, Say Goodbye to Hollywood, recorded at the Hollywood Bowl, and Eclipse, live in Böblingen in Germany, which I've not been to, and Any Colour You Like, live in Frankfurt at the Fest Hall. These are all basically copyright gap releases that appeared last year. One-off pressings, a few thousand copies, one and done. And so by the time that maybe any legal organisations would want to write a cease and desist to this organisation saying, you cannot press any more copies, it must be deleted, the label would effectively go, yeah, we're not going to press any more copies, and they're just going to have that one pressing, and then that's done forever, because the costs of legal action and sending cease and desists out is not small. So writing to a company and going, you've got to cease and desist this immediately, and go, well, we already ceased and desist before you even sent us the letter, because we only did one pressing, not going to do any more. And then, by the way, you as a record company, or you as Pink Floyd Limited, have just wasted a few £100 telling us not to do something that we're not going to do anyway. It's a sly business model. It's a high risk, low gain model, because these will sell thousands, not many thousands, but thousands maybe, and they'll be gone in the blink of an eye before you even think about it. So if you see a copy of this and you're like the kind of Pink Floyd completist like me, record collector scum, go straight for it, and knock yourselves out, so to speak. So before the release of Obscured by Clouds, but after the recording of it, the band were touring in America. As I said before, here is the Boston double CD, and this was a US tour with wives and girlfriends were on this tour, because the band were becoming more popular. They were selling bigger venues. They weren't selling 1,000, they were selling 5,000, 6,000 tickets a night. They played Hollywood Bowl to 12,000, didn't sell it out, by the way, but were selling bigger and better, and so they brought the wives and girlfriends on tour, and that kind of stopped the meandering and philandering which was ongoing, which, according to Nick Mason's book, although it's not dealt with in a huge amount of detail, there was meandering and philandering that was ongoing, and it was frowned upon by certain people in the band. So there were some differences of opinion there. But obviously, if you're going on tour and you've got your wife or your girlfriend with you, you also have effectively numbers of different camps. So if a marriage in a band, if a band is a marriage to 4 other people or 3 other people, actually if you're going on tour with your wives and girlfriends, it then becomes a marriage of 8 people, because it's not just you as the bass player or the guitarist or the keyboardist or the drummer. It's then also, your wife, his girlfriend, they need to get on, or they're not getting on. What kind of personalities are there? And things can get complicated and messy, and there can be arguments and people don't talk to each other, because the more people you introduce into an environment, the more chance there is that someone else is going to meet someone and think that someone's an absolute jerk, wanker, dickhead. So you have to be kind of careful about how you go with that. But that's not for me to worry about. That's for people in bands that are taking their wives and girlfriends on tour to worry about. But it meant that it was less jovial, it was less of a party atmosphere, the band was more serious. The Dark Side of the Moon material was more serious as well, and I think that carried with it a degree of seriousness in the material. So there you have it. Now, 2nd of June 1972 saw the release of the album I've been talking around for quite some time and have mentioned obviously a number of times. I'm going to bring it back to you, bring it back, bring it all back, as McCormick and Butler sang Obscured by Clouds there. And this is a great 10-song album that hangs together cohesively, like it was always designed to work this way. So it opens with two of my very favourite Pink Floyd tracks, actually, which are the Obscured by Clouds title track and When You're In. Now, neither of these were played live until 1973, when they were added onto the Dark Side of the Moon tour, and they became staples of the live set, normally played together as a medley. And when you listen to the songs on the studio records, you can kind of go, well, the ending of one song feels like it leans into the beginning of the other, like it's two parts of the same whole, in the same way that songs like 3 Days by Jane's Addiction work as both a number of small songs and also one big epic stitched together. So I absolutely love it. It has the first use of the VCS3, also I think a thing called a synth Narama, which is a smaller version of that. Now the VCS3 was designed by the team that used to work for the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, by the way. And what it did do is that it focused the band. The album focused the band into working under pressure. So they watched a rough cut of the album, they timed the themes and the ideas, they put together the songs, and then they put them at the relevant points in the film. The film is not great. I'll talk about the film in a minute. But what it did do is that the songs have a slightly different flavour to the other more song-based albums. They have less focus on verses, choruses, bridges and guitar solos and beginnings and endings. They're more focused as almost like themes or tone poems, songs that create atmospheres and feelings as opposed to songs that tell stories or songs that have conclusions. In some ways, a precursor to, or perhaps a sneak preview of what would later become post-rock, songs where things like verses and choruses are somewhat sidelined, and instead they are replaced with the idea of pieces of music, ideas, motifs, riffs that become circular and repetitive, and you explore the variation within each one of those, as opposed to perhaps going, well, this is a verse, this is a chorus, this is a guitar solo. It's more like, this is a guitar riff played here, this is a guitar riff played slightly differently, this is one where you arpeggiate the guitar riff, this is one where you do it on the synth as well, backing up, this is where there's a duet between the synth and the guitar and the bass and the drums, etc. It's not obvious song-based material, but I love this record because it's mostly instrumental. I can't talk about the lyrics and what the lyrics mean to me, although there are a number of songs that are vocals. There's 6 vocal tracks on the album and 4 instrumentals, and the instrumentals are Obscured by Clouds, When You're In, Mudmen, which is not great at all, and then there's let me just quickly check here, I think Absolutely Curtains as well. So those are your instrumental tracks on the album. So the vocals are Burning Bridges, Stay, Childhood's End, The Gold, and What's the Deal, as well as Free For. Now, of those songs, I've seen one song played live, which I think is What's the Deal, which was played live by David Gilmour and Rick Wright in 2006. Childhood End was played live 15 times in 1973. Obscured by Clouds and When You're In were played live about 16 or 17 times in 1973. My favourite song from the album, which is Free For, has never been played live by any member of Pink Floyd, which is a shame, but it is, I'm afraid, a risk and a cost of doing business. And by the way, I did see the comment where someone said that you cringe when you see how I hold these records. What you don't realise is I'm holding the records by the edges, and then I have my finger there on the back, on the label, and I clean them after I've finished handling them, because that's the way to do it. I use, I think it's called, is it Semitex? I can't remember what it's called, that spray stuff, and it does a great job of it as well, by the way. So, Obscured by Clouds. There was another release which came out around about the same time, not in the UK, of course, because in the UK, after the failure of the single Point Me at the Sky, Pink Floyd decided they weren't going to be releasing singles. And this is I think this is an Italian version of Free Fall, backed with the gold. It's in the and this is again one of my very favourite Pink Floyd songs. It's also got some very poignant lyrics which have later reappeared on The Dark Side of the Moon Redux by Roger Waters. The lyrics being, the memories of a man in his old age are the deeds of a man in his prime. And it's a song about touring, work, memory, regret, and old age, written from the point of view of an old dude looking back upon his life and kind of going, is this the right thing? Now, you would have thought, for a song that was so casually tossed off in a 2-week frantic session, a song a day for a soundtrack, that it would be awful. It wasn't. So, although 3/4 was never played live by Pink Floyd, and it should be, because it's a killer track. I absolutely love it. There was also a second edition. This one, I think, is the Dutch version, which features a slightly different cover, just text, purple, and then on the back, some great selections for your Harvest collection. By the way, interestingly, the single misspells David Gilmour's name, which is a source of annoyance to some people. I did work with a guy whose name was Robbins, with 2 B's. Anything came in with 1 B, he threw it in the bin saying it was for somebody else. Didn't matter if it was a tax bill or a court summons, wouldn't open it. I don't work there anymore. I thought he was a jerk. He might have thought the same about me. I don't give a shit. It was a long time ago, and stuff has happened, and I've slept since then. On the back of this Dutch version of Free Fall, it also tells you some great suggestions for your Harvest collection, including a record called Ummagumma by someone called the Pink Floyd, and a record called Atom Heart Mother, and then something by Dave Mason, Kevin Ayers. Deep Purple in rock? Nah, I'm all right, thanks. I'll be okay without Deep Purple in rock, I think, somehow. I love classic rock, but I don't love Deep Purple, because I don't think Deep Purple are good enough to be classic. Sorry, Deep Purple fans. I know that some of the stuff I like, you probably think is absolute shite. It's all good. It's a broad church, and we just need to, live in that, really, and accept that whatever floats your boat is important and matters. Free Fall then was released as a single in the US as well. It was backed with Stay. In Italy and Holland, it was backed with the gold. It's in the whatever that is. Although every time I think about I always think about the terrible song by Kiss, Party All Day and All Night, I believe is what it's called. Terrible, terrible band. Sorry, Kiss fans, but there you are. Bearing in mind that they just released an album and a soundtrack album to that, Pink Floyd decided to waste no time playing songs from Obscured by Clouds live. They absolutely didn't. Who needs songs from Obscured by Clouds live? Not us. We won't play any songs from our new studio records. We're going to carry on going on tour, and we're going to be playing songs from other parts of our career. So if you thought, I'm going to go, they've just released this new album and they're going to be playing songs from it live, they didn't until 1973, and even then they didn't play all of it, which is really, but yeah, really is the answer, by the way. This version I'm just showing you here is one of the 1994 remasters by Doug Sachs. So there have been effectively 4 main Pink Floyd kind of CD releases. The first releases in the mid-80s, which are flat transfers from the LP and cassette masters, with no mastering or no revision applied to the audio to take into account the wideness of the CD medium. Then there was 1994 or 1992. 1992 for the Shine On box set, and then 1994 the rest of the catalogue was remastered by Doug Sachs. And then 2011 there was the Discovery editions of the albums, plus various reissues between about 2011 and now. Instead, the band went on tour after the release of the album, playing nothing from it live, and played Hollywood Bowl here, released as a 2 CD, Say Goodbye to Hollywood. It says it's an LA broadcast. It isn't. It's an audience recording, because if it was a radio broadcast, it would have been on the early years box set, and it isn't. And this features, again, disc 1 is The Dark Side of the Moon, and then One of These Days and Careful with That Axe. And then disc 2 is Echo, Saucer Full of Secrets, and Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun. This was the band's biggest headlining show to date at the Hollywood Bowl on the 22nd of September 1972. The Hollywood Bowl has a capacity of 12,000 people. They didn't sell it out, but God bless them, they really, really tried. Following the American tour, the band went into the studio. They were in Abbey Road. They started recording Dark Side of the Moon on the 17th of October, and then they worked through to through the 25th, 27th, and then started again in January 1973. There was a little bit more touring to bring the year to an end, ending in, I think, Frankfurt. Here are the 2 CD releases from the back end of the tour. Again, these are the one and done copyright extension releases, which are designed effectively to depart you from your £10 for a double CD of live Pink Floyd from the 70s, with cover art that kind of looks like Pink Floyd. It clearly doesn't, but has that same kind of weird objects in places they don't really belong kind of approach. So if you look in, well, I want a cover for a Pink Floyd album or a prog rock album that looks like Pink Floyd but clearly isn't, you could do that, and you could go squint and go, yeah, that looks like it could be quite good. Not quite sure what it signifies, but we're going to go for it. This is the Sports Hall in Boblingham. Again, the 10 tracks or 11 tracks that became Dark Side of the Moon, plus Careful with That Axe, Echoes, One of These Days, and Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun, with Echoes at a whopping 26 minutes and Set the Controls at 14. This, the day after, recorded at the Fest Hall in Boblingham. Again, Dark Side of the Moon, then One of These Days, Careful with That Axe. This time Careful with That Axe is 4 minutes shorter. Echoes is shorter, it's only 25.5 minutes. And then Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun at 12 minutes. And again, one and done copyright extension releases. It was pretty quiet on a release front from Pink Floyd at that point. There was the initial cinematic version or initial theatrical cut of Pink Floyd Live at Pompeii, which, because it was recorded in 1971, I mentioned it in the previous episode, but came out in 1972, and then an expanded hour-and-a-half version of it made it to cinemas in 1974. And then we had, in 2016, somewhat unexpectedly, but in line with the 50th anniversary of the band's first recording sessions, or just about, we had the release of the Early Years box set. And for the Early Years box set, there are 2 parts of it which are worth mentioning. The first one being here, Obfuscation, which was available as a standalone release, and this one, Continuation, which was only released inside the box set. Let's go into Obfuscation. Early releases of Obfuscation, which came inside the Early Years box set, not the standalone versions, contained by mistake the soundtrack to Live at Pompeii, issued on CD. So this CD in the Early Years contains the Live at Pompeii recording, which wasn't meant to be released but was pressed by mistake. And I think this version on CD features a second take of Careful with That Axe, Eugene, which wasn't officially released on the film. There was also some DVDs that came in the set. Let's quickly go into that and see what there is. Aside from the black and white pictures of various musicians, we had on here the CD. It says the Obscured by Clouds 2016 remix, which it absolutely isn't. It's Pompeii by mistake. Then on the DVD and the Blu-ray, here We have recording sessions. In France, we have 2 songs at the Brighton Dome, Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun and Careful with the Axe Eugene. We have recordings from a ballet that the band performed with Roland Petit in France in late 1972 and early 1973. So the band played a number of shows. They played about 40-minute sets whilst ballet dancers performed in front of them. And they performed, I think, One of These Days and a number of other songs. I forget which ones they are, because really it happened in 1973. And the ballet dancers had worked out a coordinated ballet that they were going to play or going to perform, lined up and synchronised to the Pink Floyd performance. Didn't always work, because Pink Floyd decided to extend some of their songs. So, for example, one night, I did a longer version of One of These Days. The ballet dancers finished and Pink Floyd still had about 3 minutes left to go. The joys of live music. And then on the disc, there we have Live at Pompeii, the 2016 version, which is with a 5:1 audio remix, and that is an hour or so in length and features a slightly different theatrical version of it. But it's not the exact same as the theatrical cut, as the original cinematic version of Live at Pompeii put echoes at the beginning and at the end. The 2016 version has echoes as one uninterrupted song on it. And then there's a second disc. You either get a DVD or a Blu-ray in there. And you get a bunch of memorabilia. So let's go into the memorabilia and see what Fusification tells us, which is, as per normal, a booklet with recording information, reproductions of some of the flyers and various other bits. So here's a lovely one for one of the Japanese shows there. I love that art, actually. Surprised I haven't put that onto a t-shirt. You get a reproduction of the ticket stub from the show at the Wembley Pool, which also is now known as the Wembley Arena. A ticket stub for a show, again in Japan, with a lovely version of the Pink Floyd logo on. That's, by the look of it, not very much. Get a handbill for a film called The Vallee, which of course later became the soundtrack to Obscured by Clouds. A handbill for RTL, presenting Pink Floyd on tour in November and December. RTL, I think, were, let me just quickly check, Brussels, Lille, Nancy, Lyon, Paris, Toulouse and Poitiers. And then a reproduction handbill for the show in Zurich, in Vienna. Well, not in Vienna, but Zurich, which I should know where that is, but I've not been there. I fully intend to go at some point. I think Zurich's in Austria. If it's in Switzerland, sorry, there are parts of Europe I haven't been to. I'm sure I'll get to them in time. Now, Obfuscation has an error, because even though it tells you in the booklet that it has a 2016 remix of Obscured by Clouds, that wasn't on the audio. It was a soundtrack, a down mix, a 2-channel version of the 2016 5.1 remix of the soundtrack to Live at Pompeii. And instead, we had that, which means that when you opened your early years box set in the first pressings, you had an audio CD you weren't expecting, and you didn't have the Obscured by Clouds 2016 remix. So you'd write in to pinkfloyd.co.uk, and it would include a CD of the 2016 remix of Obscured by Clouds, and this is a replacement CD disc, and it says brackets stereo 2016 mix of Pink Floyd Live at Pompeii CD supplied in error. So I still don't know who mixed this version of Obscured by Clouds, and having listened to it and done a back-to-back comparison with the original Obscured by Clouds, I still don't know who did it, and I can't necessarily tell the difference between the two. I just know that there are 2 different mixes of Obscured by Clouds, the 2016 mix and the 1972 mix. And you'd have thought, if they're going to do a standalone version of Obscured by Clouds, well, put the 2016 remix on, wouldn't you? But maybe not. Or maybe just put Live at Pompeii inside your disc tray for your actual version of Obfuscation. So that is the Obfuscation, effectively Obfuscation, continuation, germination, the early years themed album year box sets are actually just bonus expanded discs that sit alongside your original studio CD. So what you can do is you can look at 1969's early years box set section, and you go, well, effectively, that's the box set, or more correctly, those are the bonus tracks that sit alongside Ummagumma and More as the bonus material. So you've got expanded editions of all of the Pink Floyd albums at the moment, aside from 1983's The Final Cut, which is about 4 episodes from now. The early years box set contained an exclusive release called Continuation, 1967 to 1972. The Continuation features off-air recordings, so that is people recording BBC radio sessions with their home tape recorders, sometimes in terrible quality, alongside the DVD and a Blu-ray of the 2 films More and Vallee. And I watched Vallee today. I have thoughts and opinions about that. In short, it's not very good. There are a number of films that were made in the late 60s and the early 70s which regarded themselves as avant-garde experimental films, which is a nice way of saying they're crap. And they have often short on narrative and big on feeling and emotions. So there's the 2 Blu-rays and the 2 DVDs, and you'll see that they have age ratings of 15 and 18 on them. And technically, you can't buy Pink Floyd's early year Super Mega box set if you're under the age of 18, which, given the price tag, ain't exactly a surprise, because the original release of early years, it came at something like £400. Jeez, what were they thinking? So, the Blu-ray on here, the second Blu-ray features the feature film of More and the feature film of Vallee. And although the copyright for Vallee and More were both owned by Les Films du Losange, they were licensed to Pink Floyd solely for the box set release, and any home versions of the album, of the films which have been released previously, which may have come with extras or subtitles, bonus features, they are not on this release. This release only features the theatrical films in their original theatrical cuts, or their original home video cuts. No subtitles, no extras, no interviews, nothing, just the movies. And I watched Vallee, and it's one of those films that mistakes not having a narrative for being enigmatic. Now, that sounds bitchy, but until you see it, you won't agree with me. Yesterday, we watched a film called I See You, a horror movie from 2019 that had about 4 plots in it, and each one of those plots was strong enough to sustain a film in its own right. That said, Vallee hasn't got enough plot to sustain one film. As far as I can work out, it's about some rich stoner kids who are French that go into a jungle and they hang out a bit, they meet some natives, they take a load of drugs, they have a bit of sex, and that's about it. It's not high on narrative, it's high on feeling and on concepts. And it's one of those things where actually, if you try to analyse, what's the story you're telling? Why are you telling this story? What's the point of it? And the whole thing falls apart very, very quickly indeed. So that is Vallee. I don't recommend watching it. Not a good film. But Obscured by Clouds, the album, oh boy, I recommend this highly. It's really good. One of my favourite Pink Floyd albums. Absolutely love it. Love this period. Strongly recommend that you buy it. Of course, it also features, as I've said before, one of my favourite Pink Floyd songs, 3/4, which I really, really like as well. And of course, if you can get a copy of it with the Obscured by Clouds remix on, you absolutely should, because the remix, although I can't tell the difference between the original and the remix, is also very good indeed. Although when I say that, I do feel like John Cleese in Time Bandits as the Sheriff of Nottingham, talking to the people, or is he Robin Hood, going very good, very good, or perhaps Colin Morris, David Bowie in Into the Night. You're very good, you know. You're really very good. I really like Obscured by Clouds. I know this episode is longer than the Obscured by Clouds album. That's frequently how these episodes go. But if you're a fan of Pink Floyd, you haven't heard Obscured by Clouds, and you think, you know, I should listen to more of their earlier weird soundtrack albums, but their soundtrack albums are crap. No, they most definitely are not. They're really, really good. I really recommend them, and I think you should listen to them and find out for yourself, because I think Obscured by Clouds is a really great record. I love it. And there's only so many times I can tell you I love it before it starts to become boring. It probably became boring 49.5 minutes ago. And if you made it all the way through here, thank you. And hopefully you will watch another episode where I won't talk about somebody who was either in Pink Floyd or Pink Floyd themselves, because there are other bands. And the next one's a secret. Might be Halloween themed. Woo, scary. So, take care of yourselves and each other. Stay beautiful. And as the Ramones said, adios amigos. See you soon. All right, bye.